Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Extinction Variations Q&A. I am so glad that you found your way here. I'm Carly Lettero with the Spring Creek Project, and I would like to welcome Kathleen Dean Moore and Nara Garber and Rachelle McCabe to the live Q&A. Thanks so much to all three of you for beaming in from your home studios. It's nice to see you. And to all of you who are joining us this evening, thank you as well. We are looking forward to your questions, and tonight we'll ask that you use the Q&A feature in Zoom. So that's right at the bottom of your screen, and you can click on that and it'll open a side window for you, and you are welcome to write your questions there. We have about 20 minutes together this evening, and so as your questions are coming in, let's get started. So for all three of you, you know, this film leaves us in a pretty sad place, a pretty heavy place. And I wonder if it was sad to work on this film as well. I'll just open that up to whoever would like to start.
Well, I'll have to say that when Rachelle and I were first going through the music, we cried and cried. And as we performed it, we also cried. But when Nara came into the project and we got into the car and we started going every which way filming, we had a ball. It was so much fun.
For me, there was no more sad piece, an appropriate piece for this theme of grief and global extinction than the Rachmaninoff Corelli Variations. So it's sometimes hard for me to get through the music without tears. There are moments that are heartbreaking, and it was hard even tonight to come back again. There's one moment where I always cry.
And I guess I would say that I came to this project much later than, you know, Kathy and Rachelle had been collaborating on this for quite a while. And Eric Gillespie had shot the original production filmed in his studio, that is intercut with the entire piece. And so I had the privilege of, Rachelle had already recorded the piano. And so we didn't have, I think you did not have to go, Rachelle, to that deep place emotionally when we were doing the additional filming with Kathy on location. And so it was probably a very different, we encountered so many kind of laughable logistical challenges in filming that added a levity to it, even though the content was profoundly deep. And I think we were all aware of that sort of disparity of content and sometimes the absurdity of production. But the seriousness was there the entire time, but we did have fun, and that was an interesting juxtaposition of emotions.
Yeah, well, if people can imagine trying to film as the tide is coming in, and as the wrong birds are singing at the wrong time, and as security guards are coming towards us at top speed, and we are leaving quickly, there were a lot of things that made it seem almost like a comedy, even in the midst of this real sorrowful, tragic story.
Yeah, that moment of where it looks like you're filming at a paper mill. Is that what's going on in the background? And there's the logging truck, and then there's Kathy, you're standing there reading, and there are the semi-truck headlights are like beaming right at you. And I was nervous for you. How did that moment feel?
Who wants to tell the story? Nara, you tell us.
Well, I think you should speak to your experience actually being the person standing in the line of fire. But Kathy was incredibly game throughout, in that we kept putting her in either unstable footing or in somewhat precarious positions. And then she had to be able to deliver and match the delivery that she has, you know, consistently brought to performances. And so, Kathy, I give you, you know, 200% credit for being able to pull that off. It felt a little bit sometimes like a film school exercise in that, can we get away with this without a permit? Yeah, I think sort of having it very often being just the three of us in a music stand, we were a fairly unthreatening presentation.
But the log truck driver did stop and ask us what the heck we were doing. And we did explain, and he said, okay, but I am going to have to call security.
We knew the clock was ticking. There would not be a chance for an additional take after that.
Talk about pressure to get it just right the first time. Well, Sue Ellen sent us a question, and she writes, the coordination between the music and the words is amazing. How did that come to be? Kathy, did you write with the music in mind? And are both the music and text in the film in their original order? So that's really a question for both of you, Rachelle and Kathy.
I'll start. This whole project came about initially a few years ago when I went to hear Kathy speak at a conference about climate change and extinction. She was challenging the audience, like she often does, to stand up and do what we need to do and come up with some ideas and act. So I left that day knowing that I needed to work with Kathy on this. We'd worked for many years together. Normally, I would read an essay and hear music, and we would do a program of my illustrating musically Kathy's writing. This time we flipped it, and I brought Kathy this profound piece of music. I was looking for a very strong piece of music to address this topic, and the Rachmaninoff was the one, as I said a minute ago. It seemed perfect for the theme of loss and grief and extinction. So yes, we spent hours and hours and hours together one day with me showing Kathy each variation, the elements of the music, the materials of the music, of course, for the end, the expression, the emotion that these the elements of the music create. And so she grasped that. She worked very hard with me for those many, many hours. It was draining. It was really a fascinating process. So by the end of that day, Kathy understood the music, I feel, and I think you can tell how closely it's linked. Her writing is linked to what's going on with the music, but we did start with the music. Kathy?
Yes, and I learned so much about that music from Rachelle and how music goes into your heart and it goes into your mind, and then I did go back home and I did write to it, but you can just imagine how many times we had to try different timings to get the plop plop just at the really right moment in the music. It was challenging.
But what I felt like, Kathy, you are able to grasp the energy or the sort of the melancholy or the brutal force that's in this music, every possible emotion, and somehow your writing becomes that way too. I mean, it's almost as if you're a musician yourself when you write.
No, because you taught me to listen, and I'll be forever grateful for that. You taught me how to open my heart to what was going on with the actual notes on the piano.
And there's a question that dives into that a little bit deeper that Laura Dolp asked. She writes that she was privileged to see the piece early on with Kathy and Rachelle. And if I remember correctly, I think you performed in New York. You can speak to that. And she says that she's curious to know, has its meaning shifted for both of you the more that you perform it, and perhaps now to see it, in the movie?
I just learned this afternoon that the gray whales going down the Pacific coast are starving. And so when I heard it today, again, just now, it took on new layers of meaning and immediacy. So, hi, Laura. I do think that it is changing as we watch, because we are getting more and more news about how urgent the crisis is and how it is just taking place just as we're listening to a movie. So that's what I would say. Rachelle?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's right. I mean, the premise of the structure of the music and the narrative are still there. I mean, it starts with stating the tragedy, right? And it's so much more acute now than it was even then when you first wrote it. And then it goes into, you know, the grief and despair of the heartbreaking place in the music where you are talking about your grandchild. And that's a place where Rachmaninoff is written in intermezzo, where Kathy talks about the turning point in the music and in the narrative turns as well there. That's even more heartbreaking now than it was the first time we did it. And finally, the sense of purpose and resolve. Kathy feels that this piece does turn that way. I've never, musically, I feel like it stays in a hopeless state. Mm-hmm. But Kathy has this way of making us feel resolve and purpose and some kind of hope that we can get through this and change. So I'm starting to go that way.
Good, that's good. Yeah, there's that one point in the music right after the intermezzo when I start talking about being afraid for my granddaughter. And I'll tell you that our husbands travel with us when we perform this, and it's often very nice to have them in the audience. They're sitting there side by side, and when we get to that point, loving is not a kind of la-di-da. And then we get to the point about there were meadowlarks. They sang like angels in the morning. Frank, who's a very stalwart man, my husband, his face all crinkles all up like, he just crinkles it up. And Philip cries. You can just count on it.
Every time.
And, you know, we tried to do this so that everyone could come together and watch the film as best as we could together tonight without being in a theater. But I do think that that's part of what we missed this evening, is that feeling in the theater together. So no, to all of you who are tuning in right now, we were thinking about you and with you in those moments as best as we could have been. So we've heard a little bit about, and I mean, this is fascinating. I'd love to hear more about your collaboration on this project. And Nara, I'd like to know where were Kathleen and Rachelle in this process when they found you? How did you come into this collaboration, and what has that been like for you?
I had met Kathy for the first time on a different project in, I think that was the winter of 2016. I remember that was the beginning of the election year. And it's interesting to have these time markers and realize in terms of thinking about climate crisis and what's happening to our Earth, just how what seemed more dire than one could imagine at any one point in time, it just became more and more so. And I met Rachelle when Kathy and Rachelle were performing in New York. So at the same performance, I guess, as Laura. And it was just wonderful, everything that people are saying about the synergy of the words and the music. I was just so struck by that. And there was no discussion of filming at that point in time. I was just there as an audience member and felt incredibly privileged to see it live in such an intimate space. And then I can't remember exactly when it was that I think Kathy reached out with an email. I don't remember what the time frame was in terms of when I heard that they would be interested in filming, and they had already done the first part of filming, but of taking it outside the confines of a studio. But I'm so glad that I did get to see it live, and I had that experience, that very, very emotional experience of seeing them perform together. And Kathy, I agree with Rachelle. I think there is something that is so lyrical and musical about your writing. It's so clearly a collaboration between the two of you. And so it was a question for me of how do we then take it outside in a way that doesn't distract from what it is that they've already created.
Well, you did that beautifully. I mean, the places that you chose to film just add so much to the piece.
And I do not get sole credit for that, since I was new to the area. So we all piled in a car and, you know, they had done some advanced scouting, and then some of the locations we pretty much found on the fly.
Yeah, so were you just driving around? I mean, I'm sure just knowing Kathleen a little bit, there was surely a little bit of a plan going into the drive, but then did you just see some places and say, let's pull over here? And
I think the location that we were talking about before with the entrance to the mill was kind of we had gotten a couple of things, you know, under our belt already that day. And it's like, well, let's see if we can actually do this. But that was a spontaneous, that was not a definite location until we made it one.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the risk.
We pretty much knew. Frank drove us, and we started at the coast, and then we went to the Walmart, and then we ended up in the mountains, and then stopped at the barricade on the way home. So it was 2 days, 3 days. How long did it take us?
Yeah, I believe we did some scouting the first day, and then we shot for 2 days. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, Anne sent us this question. She writes that I love this line and the quote, "Change will come from the consciousness of the streets." And then her question, what advice do you have for other creatives to deal with their grief and share their voice to shift the consciousness of the streets?
Right. I think the quote is, it'll come from the conscience of the street.
Yes.
From the moral sensibility of the street. And when she says creatives, other creatives, I think she's probably talking about art in all its forms. When I think about the crises that are facing civilization, all the tangled injustices and starvation and every crisis, I think about Medusa. And you remember her hair? It was all these tangles of snakes and everything. It seems to me sometimes when I think about the world that that image comes to my mind. And the problem is, you remember what happens when people look straight at Medusa, they turn to stone. And I think that's what's happened to us. The problems are so great. They're so ugly. They seem so connected and intractable that, that we are paralyzed and we don't know how to begin. So I think about Theseus, who came with his magic sword and his shiny shield. And he held the shield up to Medusa, and seeing her reflection in the shield, he reached out and cut off her head. Well, I think that the creatives, that the questioner that Anne asks about, artists are this reflective shield. So we don't have to look directly at the crises because it's too much. But the crises can be transformed and made beautiful or tragic or manageable or strategic in the eyes of an artist or a musician or a filmmaker. And I think that that is a way of breaking through so that we can see the problems, but they're being represented in a way that is accessible to us.
Thanks for that. That image will, I think, stick with many of us, and it's really yeah, absolutely. I mean, a new way of thinking about Medusa. Kim also sent in a question and asked, what are some ways that you see that writers, musicians, filmmakers, and just lovers of the world can convince people to listen who aren't yet ready to believe or hear the message? And I'll open that up to all of you.
I think collaborating with other artists is a good step forward to be able to reach, to have a writer listen to me play, you know, a wide variety of listeners is a convincing way. Also, we're kind of creating a new sort of art form with the collaboration, the words and the music and the visual. So I think that's very convincing to a lot of people. It gives people a lot of different ways to think about what they're watching and hearing. I think the call to action is really important in this work. And Kathy has a list of things people can do that will put a really practical slant on it. And it's a purposeful, go out and actually do something, act on one's feelings. I think the question was people who aren't ready to face it, but perhaps they just need a little push and a few ideas. Right? This I think list of purposeful activities is something you've added to this project, Kathy, right? Things one can do.
Yes, and it's interesting that this question comes from Kim. We are looking at a time when I think there's this incredible flourishing of the arts and the invention of all kinds of new art forms, and all of us getting outside of our comfort zone and trying new ways of inviting people to listen. Talking about our children, talking about the future, talking about things we love like meadowlarks. I think that there's so many things that we have together that we share that are greater than the things that divide us. I'm starting to sound like President Biden. But I do believe it's true. And starting there maybe is part of it. And inventing new art forms like Kim Stafford has decided to design these tiny books of poems that he just gives away, freely gives away, to try to reach people who wouldn't ever probably go and buy a volume of poetry, but would leaf through this beautiful, unassuming collection of appeals to what we all love.
For me, I'm taking a piece of classical music that's already existing. It's intact. We didn't mess around with that at all. I felt very strongly about keeping that Rachmaninoff as it was, but it is transformed and maybe enhanced. Maybe also the writing is enhanced by the music, so the art form becomes larger, right? With all these other components, the visual and. That's been exciting. That's the transformation of a piece of classical music for a good purpose.
And film, Nara, with the COVID and we're all isolated, Zoom and film has become really the go-to medium, isn't it?
It's, yeah, I mean, yeah, video and just sort of kind of weird video communications, but I think this is something that we can still gather. We don't get the theater experience, we don't get that communal experience of viewing things together, but it's something that can be shared. But I was also thinking, you know, we had that brief conversation last night to chat about things, and just listening to the two of you talk, I'm thinking again, and to you sounding a little bit like President Biden, Kathy, I'm thinking again how differently we can approach this, and the notion of how can one change minds and bring in people who are not necessarily ready to think about these issues now than was maybe even possible a couple of weeks ago, in that I feel your Medusa metaphor, it was almost like we couldn't even get at the snarl of all those hideous competing issues because there was a snarl of scandal and just daily noise over that. And now I feel like we have the time and emotional wherewithal to deal with long form, to give full attention to longer form pieces again. And that's such a relief to me, because I had begun to wonder if the only types of films that could make a difference any longer were shorter form advocacy pieces, sort of like the Now This, the things that get shared on the internet that are, you know, 2 minutes long, that deal with a very specific topic and pull the heartstrings in a very similar way. And I thought maybe that's where everything is going, because we're all so distracted. And I'm feeling in recent days, and after watching this again tonight and just feeling my own mental energy settle a little bit, more confident that we can, as a species, resume more complex artistic endeavors that actually have meaning. And that's a heartening feeling. I haven't felt that way in a while.
Oh, I hope that's true. And I hope that's true for many of you who are watching as well. With that in mind, Nara, what's next for you? What projects are you working on?
Well, I'm working on one project about a musician in Anguilla that is unrelated enough that I won't go into that too much, but I'm working on a project with Sarah Bowie, the woman through whom I met Kathy as part of this Council on the Uncertain Human Future several years ago. That's another sort of interesting collaboration between different art forms. We filmed at Mass MoCA in mid-December, which because of COVID presented its own series of sort of logistical hurdles in terms of COVID testing and social distancing and mask wearing. But there are 2 exhibits up at Mass MoCA right now, done by 2 artists. Liddell Moe has this exhibit, When, of these sort of monumental kind of fallen figures that really make one question life on Earth, human longevity, what it is that how will human beings survive? They're just all these existential issues that are instantly, one finds oneself pondering when one walks into that space. And then Blaine de Saint Croix, another artist, has one that's much more literally about climate crisis and the consequences of extraction. And so we filmed an almost sort of silent meditation of people Sarah had convened to come to MASMOCA in both exhibits, and then just did audio interviews afterwards. And so it's a matter of sort of piecing that together with the sound, the ambient sound of both exhibits, in a way that is, again, a sort of melding of different art forms, and respecting the artist's work as much as possible in the filmmaking process. So that we're about to go into post-production on that. But it feels like it's in the same family of kind of collaboration, and trying to raise the same questions and steer people towards thinking about the same concerns.
We will look forward to that. And if there's a way that if people can follow along in some way, we'll put that in the chat. We've also put in the chat the list of actions that Rachelle mentioned that Kathy has written. And I know, Rachelle and Kathy, do you have any future plans for collaborations? And Kathy, I also want to give you a moment to talk about the launch of your next project, which is really starting with the premiere tonight. So I'll kind of ask you those two questions in one there. And then I think with that, we'll say goodnight in just a moment here.
We, with the Spring Creek Project and Carly and Shelley, we are launching a series of tiny concerts. Each one is 4 minutes long, and they're going to be released from now on every Monday and every Thursday before 6 o'clock. And Rachelle has done 3 or 4 of them. So I've invited 20 wonderful, well, we have invited 20 wonderful writers to be guest readers, and they're all reading tiny little pieces, excerpts from my new book, Earth's Wild Music, about an animal, a sidewinder rattlesnake, or Tyrannosaurus Rex, or wolf pups, or the albatross. And they're accompanied by a videotaped live performance of a variety of different instruments. Rachelle plays beautifully on the classical piano. We also have a jazz tuba player who plays in his bathroom because he loves to play the resonance of his bathroom. We have a percussionist. And so every one of these films is going to be amazing. Some of them funny, some of them really quite strikingly alarming, and some of them just plain sad. But I hope that people will tune in on this. It's always fun to work with Rachelle, and I'm so glad that she stepped up. Rachelle, you're playing for the Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yes, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, a very loud and thumpy piece by Gina Stara. It's perfect. And beautiful essay, The Albatross. I am performing a gorgeous piece by Sibelius for that. And then a more Rachmaninoff for your Timberwolf adult. Sorry, not the pups.
Adult Timberwolves, right.
Adult Timberwolf, yeah. That project has really been just a joy to work on during these times. They have felt like dark times, and I feel like they're getting a little bit lighter. And so we hope and invite everyone to follow along with those. You can follow along on the Spring Creek Project website, and Shelley will put a link to that in the chat, and so you can check those out. You can also, this film is posted now, and so you can rewatch it anytime. You can also share it freely and widely with anyone, and so you've got the link in YouTube, and feel free to post it and get the word out. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the Q&A, and Rachelle and Nara and Kathy. It's really wonderful to see you and just to hear a little bit more about this really incredible film. And we're wishing it just millions of views as it launches into the world. Thank you so much for your creative work and your deep love of the world. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Carly.